The first time I watched them play back the footage, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Grainy hallway camera. Timestamp in the corner. Friday, 6:47 p.m. A tired man in a navy shirt, laptop bag slung over one shoulder, walking into Gateway Plaza like he'd done it 100 times. That man was me. The tablet was lying flat on the glass conference table, tilted just enough so I could see my own face in that cheap security resolution. Patricia Wells nudged it toward me with 2 fingers like she was presenting Exhibit A in a trial. She told me, in that clinical HR tone they must practice in front of a mirror, that we needed to talk about my after-hours activities. Her face was arranged in neutral, but her eyes were sharp and cold. Sitting on her right was Austin Reed from compliance, pretending he didn't enjoy any of this. His lips were pressed into a polite line, but he had that little gleam that says, "I finally got you." I sat back in the chair and folded my hands. I'd been in that room 100 times to explain outages, mitigation plans, future capacity needs. But that morning it felt different. The air from the ceiling vents seemed colder, the glass walls clearer, like the whole building was leaning in to watch. Patricia tapped the screen and froze the footage on my profile as I walked into the building. She explained that the address I was entering belonged to a strategic competitor, that my employment agreement prohibited working for any company in the same space, that TechVault had a zero-tolerance policy for conflicts of interest and breaches of trust. She listed the sections of my contract like charges. I listened politely, nodding at the right spots. I'd read that contract more carefully in the last 2 months than she had in 4 years. I knew exactly what it said and what it didn't. When she finally slid a printed document across the table, I already knew what it was. Termination effective immediately. For cause. Badge revoked. Benefits cut off. Security escort. All the usual phrases that turn a person from valued team member into risk to be contained. She told me my employment was over and that they expected full cooperation with the offboarding process. Austin added that it would include transferring all system credentials and passwords, and that any attempt to withhold information would be treated as misconduct. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I didn't even ask who'd taken the video of my truck near Gateway Plaza and slid it under someone's door. I just felt this strange, almost physical lightness in my chest, like somebody had reached in and unclipped a set of chains I'd forgotten I was wearing. I told them they were absolutely right about one thing. I did need to focus on one position. For a moment, both of them blinked. The script in their heads didn't match my reaction. They were prepared for anger, bargaining, maybe a threat about lawyers or unfair treatment. They were ready with their phrases about corporate policy and not a reflection of your contributions. They weren't ready for a man who accepted the verdict like he'd been waiting for it. I took my badge off my belt and placed it on the table. It made the smallest sound against the glass, but in my head it was loud. For years of late-night alerts, emergency calls, and "Bradley, can you jump on a quick call?" condensed into a plastic rectangle with my faded photo. Austin repeated his request about passwords. He tried to sound firm and professional. It still came off a little desperate. I told him everything was documented in the internal knowledge base, the way our own protocols required. That part was true. I had written more documentation than anyone in that building. But without the context in my head, half of it was like handing someone a city map with the street names scratched off. Technically complete, practically useless. They didn't understand that, and I wasn't going to volunteer the explanation. A security guard I'd seen around the lobby came in after a minute. Nice guy, mid-40s, always held the door when my hands were full. He avoided eye contact, which I appreciated. Humiliation is worse when someone looks at you with pity. He walked me down the hallway while I pretended not to notice the way conversations dipped as we passed. When you work in infrastructure, most people only know you as that guy they call when something breaks. Suddenly being escorted by security gives them a new narrative. Must have done something terrible with the data. I could feel eyes on my back from behind glass partitions. Nobody stepped out. Nobody said anything. It wasn't their fault, really. You don't step in front of a moving train to ask why it's running late. At my desk, the guard waited while I pulled down the sum total of my personal life at TechVault. One coffee mug with a crooked #OneDad printed on it. Emma had picked it out when she was 12, bought with her own babysitting money. A small cactus that somehow survived under LED panels and recycled air despite my habit of ignoring it for weeks. One battered notebook filled with messy sketches of system diagrams that would only make sense to me. That was it. For years reduced to a mug, a plant, and a few pages of graphite. Across the floor, behind another sheet of glass, I could see Jennifer, our CTO. She was standing at her desk with her arms crossed, staring at the scene like she already knew exactly what would happen next if they followed through with this. Our eyes met for half a second. She didn't move. I saw something like regret in her face, regret, and the calculation of someone who knows politics has already decided the outcome. I tucked the mug into my bag, balanced the cactus in my other hand, and followed the guard past the rows of standing desks and dual monitors that had become the background of my life. No one stopped me. A few people pretended to be deeply absorbed in whatever was on their screens. A couple looked away too fast. In the elevator, the guard cleared his throat and quietly told me he was sorry. I told him it wasn't his fault and that every system eventually fails exactly where you refuse to invest. I don't know if he got what I meant, but he nodded anyway. The lobby doors opened and the Texas spring air hit me like a different planet. Warm, full of dust and sunlight, a little pollen. I hadn't realized how long I'd been breathing filtered, conditioned air until that moment. I stepped outside with my entire career at TechVault in a single bag. By the time I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. One text preview lit the screen. Still good for our 2 p.m.? Diana. I stood there in the parking lot with my hand on the door handle, looking at those words. Our 2 p.m. was supposed to be a discreet check-in at Apex Solutions office. Another quiet weekend consulting meeting I'd squeezed in between system patches and emergency calls. That morning, these meetings had been my side path to a future I wasn't sure I'd ever actually take. Now, in the span of 30 minutes, that side path had become the only road in front of me. I leaned against the truck and let my head rest on the metal for a second. My pulse was still steady. Years of firefighting outages had trained my body to accept adrenaline as a permanent roommate. The difference was, this time, there was no dashboard to pull up, no graph to flatten, no incident note to write. I texted back that we were still on and added one more line. I could accept a full-time offer now. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared. I could picture Diana reading the message in her glass-walled office across town, eyes narrowing slightly, already reorganizing her afternoon in her head. She wasn't someone who wasted time. I put the phone in my pocket and slid into the driver's seat. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't have to check my email before starting the engine. I didn't have to open Slack to see if something was on fire. I didn't have to wonder if going offline for 20 minutes would be the difference between minor issue resolved and front page of the business section. Halfway out of the lot, my phone rang. I saw TechVault's main number on the dash. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever they wanted, they could say it into the void like I'd been doing with my warnings for years. As I pulled onto the road, that odd sense of lightness settled over me again. It wasn't joy. Not yet. It was more like when the dentist finally pulls a tooth you've been pretending doesn't hurt. You still feel raw and numb, but underneath it there's this deep relief that the worst part is over. Money flashed through my mind next. Mortgage with 12 years left. Emma's tuition. Health insurance. I mentally opened spreadsheets I'd built at 2 a.m. on other nights. Rainy day fund, emergency savings, the consulting checks from Apex that had already started filling in the gaps. I hadn't planned to cut the cord this suddenly, but I hadn't exactly been walking into this blind either. That was the part nobody in that conference room understood. The man on their tablet, walking into Gateway Plaza at 6:47 p.m., wasn't sneaking behind their backs to cash in on secrets. He was a middle-aged infrastructure architect who had finally realized he couldn't keep betting his daughter's future on a company that kept telling him, "We'll fix it next quarter." Traffic thinned out as I headed toward downtown. The sky over Austin was a pale blue, streaked with jet trails. I rolled the window down and let the warm air push against my face. No alert sounds. No vibration from the phone with "urgent" in the subject line. Just the sound of my tires on the road and a faint country song from someone else's car at a red light. I thought about the look on Patricia's face when I'd agreed to the termination without a fight. HR people like things tidy, predictable. Anger is messy. Tears are awkward. Calm acceptance doesn't fit the story they tell themselves about being the bearers of bad news. It shifts the weight back onto them and the decision they're executing. I also thought about Austin sitting there with that controlled smirk. Somewhere in his inbox were my emails from the last 2 years, flagged high importance, explaining in painful detail how our entire trading platform relied on one overworked architect who was quietly falling apart. He'd never replied to those. Now he had his conflict of interest. His clean line in a report, terminated for cause. It would look good in a slide deck if anyone ever asked why their senior infrastructure architect suddenly vanished 3 days before end-of-quarter processing. They thought they had cut out a liability. What they had actually done was cut out the only person who knew exactly how fragile their entire system really was. The irony would have made me laugh if it weren't so predictable. At the next light, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a new message from Diana. She told me the board at Apex had approved the offer we talked about in theory. Senior infrastructure architect, team of 4, generous salary, meaningful equity. She asked how soon I could start. For hours earlier, I would have agonized over that question all weekend. I would have tried to find some way to give TechVault 2 weeks' notice, to document more, to leave them in a better position than they deserved. I would have worried about appearing unprofessional to the same people who had no problem pulling a trigger in a glass box at 9:15 on a Thursday. Sitting at that red light, watching the cross-traffic blur past, the answer was suddenly very simple. I told her I could start Monday. If you really want to understand how I ended up in that glass conference room with a tablet full of grainy footage pointed at my face, you have to go back 4 years. Back to the day I walked into TechVault thinking I just landed the opportunity of a lifetime. I still remember my first interview with Jennifer. She wasn't CTO yet, just head of infrastructure architecture. But she spoke like someone already sitting 2 levels higher. She told me they were building a world-class technical backbone, the kind companies talked about on earnings calls. She said I designed the database architecture for their proprietary trading platform, help build a full team of specialists, and have the freedom to innovate without red tape. Sounded like a dream job. The salary wasn't life-changing, but it was solid. Austin was pricey, and my mortgage wasn't exactly gentle, but the promise of building something from scratch blinded me. After 23 years in enterprise systems, first at IBM, then at a few mid-sized firms, I'd spent too many nights patching other people's bad decisions. The idea of creating a clean, elegant structure from the ground up felt like a second chance. I accepted the offer within a day. 3 months later, reality walked in and slapped me across the face. It started with a strategic restructuring. That's what the email called it. 2 senior architects, people I was supposed to co-lead with, were transitioned out before I'd even learned where the good coffee machine was. Their replacements, on hold due to budget priorities. When I asked Jennifer what happened, she told me, just a temporary freeze. We'll staff back up next quarter. She sounded so confident I believed her. Next quarter came. No hires. Next year came. Still no hires. Then a merger came. No change. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Sarah, the only other architect who understood half the system, accepted a 40% raise at a startup across the street. Before she left, she hugged me and whispered, "Don't let them do to you what they did to me." I didn't know what she meant back then. I do now. After she left, the job stopped being architecture and became triage. Users increased. Clients doubled. Attack vectors multiplied. The trading engine expanded. Systems grew more complex. But the team? Just me. Every time I sent an email explaining that we needed at least 3 more specialists, someone told me, "Let's reassess after the next quarter." Or "Let's hold until the merger stabilizes." Or my personal favorite, the CFO's line, "If you document better, we won't need more headcount." That man never wrote a line of code in his life, but he had strong opinions about how engineering teams should be run. I started keeping a private log, dates, requests, warnings, who was in the room, what they said. Not because I planned to use it, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining the slow-motion disaster unfolding around me. And then came Christmas. That was the year Emma came home from college for the holidays. She had planned this whole dinner. Roasted chicken, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce she'd made herself. She'd even bought a string of cheap LED lights to wrap around our tiny living room tree. She set the table for two. She put on that playlist she always used when she cooked. And at 5:42 p.m., my phone screamed with an alert. Authentication breach attempt. Severity level critical. I told Emma, "Give me a few minutes." She nodded, trying not to look disappointed. Those few minutes turned into 60 hours. I rebuilt our authentication infrastructure from scratch while my daughter ate dinner alone, washed the dishes alone, and left a plate covered in foil on the counter for me. At 3 a.m., I walked out of my office and found her asleep on the couch with the TV still on. I covered her with a blanket, microwaved the food she'd saved, and went back to fighting the attack. When the crisis passed, the CEO sent an all-staff email praising our robust security posture and our company-wide resilience. I got a $250 coffee shop gift card taped inside a generic holiday card with my name printed slightly crooked. I told Jennifer that weekend, "We can't keep running like this." She said she understood, but her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, as if someone might overhear her admitting the obvious. She told me, "You're the backbone of this place. Nobody understands these systems like you do." And she meant it as a compliment. That was the problem. When people believe only one person can hold everything together, they don't fix the system. They cling tighter to the person. By January, my blood pressure was so high the nurse at my checkup asked if I'd sprinted to the clinic. I told her no. She told me to cut stress immediately or risk a stroke. I sat in my car afterward and laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Cutting stress is easy advice when your phone doesn't wake you up at 2:13 a.m. 3 nights a week. That same month, I scheduled a meeting with Jennifer and the executive team. I brought charts, industry comparisons, staffing models, risk assessments. I showed them in simple, painful detail that our architecture required round-the-clock maintenance from someone who understood every single interconnected piece. I told them, "If anything happens to me, you'll have a breakdown within days, catastrophic failure within weeks." The CFO leaned back and said, "Sounds like we need better documentation, not more headcount." I felt something inside me tear, clean and quiet, like a thread snapping. I said I had submitted documentation requests every quarter for 2 years. Every single one had been deprioritized. They stared at me like I was being dramatic. I walked out of that room knowing nothing would change. Not until the entire building was on fire. But there was no time to dwell. 2 days later, I had to patch another vulnerability, write another late-night report, hold another meeting with people who nodded politely and did nothing. Then came the conference in Denver. I wasn't supposed to attend. Our travel budget was frozen. But the organizer was an old IBM colleague who offered me a speaking slot. TechVault couldn't say no to free publicity. So they sent me with a corporate polo and a "Represent Our Brand Well" speech. That conference changed everything. I gave a talk about adaptive database security, more theory than practice, because if I actually described TechVault's real systems, half the audience would have needed therapy. When I stepped off stage, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm confidence introduced herself as Diana Pierce from Apex Solutions. She said, "Your framework was impressive. I'd love to hear how you implement some of those concepts." We must have talked for 2 hours. Real conversation. Real curiosity. She didn't ask me to fix anything. She didn't praise me like a magician pulling rabbits out of hats. She asked questions, challenged assumptions, listened. I've forgotten what that felt like. She gave me her card and said, "We could use your insight on a new project. Advisory only. Weekends. Nothing that would conflict with your current role." When she mentioned the consulting fee, I almost laughed. I'd been paid more for one Saturday session with Apex than for a full week of crisis management at TechVault. But before I said yes, I spent nights reading every clause in my employment agreement. I called a lawyer friend and asked hypothetical questions. I made sure I wasn't touching competitive data or crossing a line I couldn't uncross. When I finally accepted the advisory work, something shifted inside me. I didn't realize it yet, But that was the moment I started walking away from TechVault. During those 6 weeks, I lived 2 lives. Weekdays, the overworked firefighter, patching holes in a sinking ship while executives debated whether to approve a new espresso machine for their floor. Weekends, a respected expert, sitting in a bright conference room with engineers who actually wrote down what I said and scheduled follow-up meetings when something didn't add up. Emma noticed before I did. One night at dinner she said, "Dad, you seem lighter." I told her I'd picked up a little consulting work. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Or maybe someone finally listens to you. Smart kid." For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning. I still worked too much, but I could breathe between the waves. Then came the offer. Diana texted me after a board meeting at Apex. "They want to offer you a full-time role. Team of 4. Salary twice what you make now. Equity. Senior title. Interested." I stared at the message for a long time. It felt like a rope thrown down to someone who'd pretended for too long that he wasn't stuck in a well. I told her I'd think about it over the weekend. But I already knew. The only question was timing. I wanted to leave TechVault cleanly. Put in 2 weeks. Document more. Train whoever they hired next. Leave in a way that wouldn't burn bridges. That was the plan. And then, on an ordinary Thursday morning, I walked into the office to grab a coffee, check overnight alerts, and have a meeting about storage allocation. Just another day of holding everything together. At 9:15, my phone rang. It was Patricia. She told me, "We need to discuss something with you urgently. Please come to conference room B." And just like that, everything I had built, everything I had patched, saved, predicted, and protected for 4 years came crashing down. Not because of a breach. Not because of an outage. Not because of negligence. Because someone saw my truck parked too close to Apex Solutions and decided to report it. They thought they had found a smoking gun. What they didn't realize, what they would only understand 72 hours later, was that they had just removed the only thing preventing their entire system from collapsing under its own weight. If I had known that parking my truck 3 blocks closer to Gateway Plaza would set off the chain reaction that destroyed an entire company's infrastructure, I might have taken a different spot. Or maybe I wouldn't have. Hard to say now. What I do know is that the 6 weeks before that moment, those weekends at Apex, those quiet advisory sessions, those conversations with people who respected what I knew, were the first time in years I remembered what it felt like to be good at something without being exploited for it. Let me back up. Because those 6 weeks weren't just some side gig. They were a reminder of the person I used to be before TechVault turned me into a permanent firefighter with a laptop. After Denver, when Diana first reached out about advisory work, I spent an entire night at my kitchen counter with a highlighter and my employment agreement spread out like a crime scene. I read every line, every clause about confidentiality, every vague sentence about competitive activity, every phrase that sounded like a trap set by a bored corporate lawyer. I called my friend Mark. He's a lawyer who drinks expensive bourbon and loves explaining things. I told him, hypothetically, if someone were to provide advisory input on theoretical system architecture. He cut me off and said, "Bradley, advisory work is fine as long as you don't share proprietary data. Don't touch their code, don't discuss production systems, don't give anything away that belongs to TechVault. Stick to concepts, you're safe." That was good enough for me. So I said yes. On my first Saturday at Apex, I walked into a glass meeting room with 4 engineers already seated, notebooks open. One of them, Chris, a database specialist, looked up and said, "We've been excited for this session." I blinked. Excited? Nobody at TechVault had been excited to see me in years. When I walked into a room there, it usually meant something was broken. Diana took the seat across from me and said, "For today, we just want your thoughts. High-level review. If anything you say touches competitive territory, we'll stop immediately." She meant it. Every time I drifted too close to specifics, she'd raise a hand and say, "Generalize it. Don't risk your job." Imagine that. Someone protecting me. We went over their proposed security framework, talked about scaling models, replication strategies, potential choke points. They asked smart questions, not the fake kind executives ask to sound informed, but real questions from people who cared about doing things right. When I pointed out a possible vulnerability in their database sharding strategy, They didn't nod and then ignore it. They scheduled a follow-up session. Chris told me, "We want to understand the logic behind your approach." Nobody at TechVault had asked me why in years, only how fast I could fix things. After the session, Diana walked me downstairs to the lobby. She told me, "Your insight is refreshing. Most architects focus on theory. You understand the moving parts." I told her, 26 years of watching systems break in real time will do that. She smiled in that way people do when they're already planning something. That night I came home humming. Emma noticed immediately. She asked, "Good day." I told her it was decent. She gave me the smirk the kind teenage daughters master at birth. She said, "You look like someone who finally remembered he has options." And she wasn't wrong. My mortgage had been a weight on my chest since the interest rate spiked 2 years back. Emma's tuition, $35,000 a year for the University of Texas, was draining everything but fumes. I'd been piecing together side projects just to keep her from drowning in student debt. The consulting checks from Apex felt like air returning to a suffocating room. But the real change wasn't the money. It was the respect. During those 6 weeks, my weekends became quiet acts of rebellion. On Saturday mornings, I'd sit at a long conference table, talk through ideas, have people actually listen. On Sundays, I'd walk the trails near my place, thinking about what it would feel like to build something without begging for resources or presenting risk charts nobody read. Meanwhile, TechVault was still TechVault. Every weekday, I'd wake up to 36 alerts from systems that needed manual intervention. I'd patch a failing replication node, then dry swallow ibuprofen because my head felt like someone was playing drums inside it. I'd join a meeting where someone asked, "Why do we need more staff? Everything's working fine," while I silently wondered how long a single human could function as a full-time safety net. By the time Wednesday rolled around each week, I was counting the hours until Saturday, until I could sit with people who weren't afraid of hard questions or allergic to technical depth. One night, I found myself sitting at my small dining table, laptop open, lighting dim. I was reviewing Apex's latest proposal. Their team had made thoughtful revisions based on my notes. Actual progress. Actual improvement. I didn't realize I was smiling until I caught my reflection in the black part of the screen. It hit me then. I hadn't smiled at my work in years. That's when Diana's text arrived. The board approved the full-time role. Team of 4. Salary twice what you make now. Equity included. Interested. I stared at that message so long my screen dimmed. Then Emma came into the kitchen wearing her UT sweatshirt. She saw the look on my face and asked, "What's wrong?" I told her, "Nothing's wrong. Something might be very right." She sat next to me and said, "Dad, just say yes." I didn't tell her how afraid I was. Afraid of leaving a place where I knew every cable and quirk. Afraid of starting over at almost 50. Afraid that if I stepped away, the whole TechVault system would implode, and somehow they'd blame me. I needed time. Just a weekend, I told myself. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. On a Thursday morning, the one that started like any other. Coffee in hand, overnight logs open, my fingers halfway through writing a patch request. My phone rang with that call from Patricia, the one that ended my 4 years in 15 minutes. Later, as I replayed everything, I realized the irony. I had planned to leave gracefully, to document everything, train whoever they hired next, build a smooth exit. I wanted to walk out in daylight, not be shoved out the back door by HR. But the universe decided to save me the trouble. And it saved me from something else too. Something I didn't see coming until 3 days later. TechVault's system wasn't built to run without me. Not because I wanted it that way, because their decisions had forced it that way. For 4 years I had been the glue, the duct tape, the silent scaffolding keeping the whole structure upright. They ignored every warning, every risk assessment, every plea for more staff, every memo that spelled out exactly what would happen if I ever disappeared. And then one Thursday morning, they made me disappear. They handed me my badge and escorted me out like a criminal. They thought they were cutting out a liability. What they had actually cut out was the entire support beam. The single point of failure I'd warned them about, they just pulled it out with both hands. And the clock. My silent, terrible prophecy. started ticking down from 72 hours. When people talk about disaster, they picture explosions. Fast, loud, sudden. But the collapse of TechVault didn't look like that. It looked like a slow-motion landslide. Pebbles rolling first, then dirt slipping, then the whole mountainside cracking open. And I knew the exact timeline by heart because I'd held it together with my own hands for 4 straight years. My first day at Apex, Monday morning. I walked through their lobby in a new shirt Emma insisted I buy. She said I needed a clean start outfit. The sunlight through the glass made the space feel like a different planet compared to the tinted gray halls of TechVault. Diana met me at the entrance with her tablet tucked under her arm. She told me, "Welcome home, Bradley." Nobody at TechVault had ever welcomed me anywhere. She walked me to my office, not a desk in the corner of the server floor. My name was already on the door. A team of 4 was waiting inside. Chris, the database guy with the curious eyes. Mia, their scalability engineer. Jordan from cybersecurity. And Alex, the systems operations lead. Chris shook my hand and said, "We heard you built an entire architecture alone. We've been dying to pick your brain." It was strange to be looked at with admiration instead of exhaustion. Strange, but good. By lunch, we were sketching out a roadmap for Apex's new infrastructure. I explained ideas, and they didn't just nod, they built on them. They challenged them. They improved them. Collaboration. The thing I thought I'd never feel again. Meanwhile, across town, TechVault's first pebble rolled. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. I saw the name before I heard the voicemail. Jennifer. I didn't answer. Later, when I listened, her voice was forced calm as she said they were seeing some minor issues with database replication and wanted my quick advice if I had a moment. I deleted it. Tuesday morning, the real cracks appeared. For missed calls before 10 a.m., then 8 more by lunch. Each voicemail sounded a little more frantic. Someone, maybe Patricia, said, "We're experiencing significant degradation." Someone else said, "The CEO wants to discuss terms for your return as a consultant." I texted back one sentence. "I'm focusing on one position now, as you advised." My phone stayed silent for maybe 2 hours. Then it exploded. 20 calls, nearly 40 texts, a few emails begging me to consider the company's urgent situation. I turned the phone off and kept working with my team at Apex. They had a meeting room ready, the whiteboard full, and actual budget approval to build the system we were planning. Felt unreal. Felt like breathing clean air after years in a basement full of smoke. But at TechVault, by Wednesday, the landslide began. Because I could predict their system like I could predict my own heartbeat. I knew exactly what was happening. The weekly replication cycle tried to run at noon. No one there understood the manual cleanup steps I performed every Monday morning. The queue overflowed. Logs ballooned. The trading engine began timing out on read operations. Transactions slowed, then halted, then failed. At 1:30 p.m., I turned my phone on again. The screen lit up like someone had set it on fire. 23 missed calls. Texts from numbers I didn't recognize. One from Patricia that said, "Legal is reviewing your termination. Please call urgently." One from Austin that said, "Whatever Apex is paying you, we'll triple it. This is critical." And one from the CEO, who had never once spoken to me directly in 4 years. National clients losing access. Regulatory implications. "We need you immediately." I put the phone face down and kept working with my team. Later that night, driving home, I heard a news alert through the Bluetooth speaker. Major infrastructure failure reported at an Austin-based financial technology company. Hundreds of thousands of customer accounts inaccessible. They didn't say the company name. They didn't need to. I sat in traffic, watching the red glow of brake lights reflect on my windshield. For a moment, I felt something like sadness, not for the executives, but for the regular employees who were probably panicking, and for the customers whose data was held hostage by corporate negligence. My phone rang again as I walked into my house. Jennifer's number. I let it go to voicemail. Something told me I needed to hear this one. Her voice was cracked, almost shaking. She said, "Bradley, everything is failing. Database synchronization, transaction processes. It's cascading. Nobody can stop it. Please, just tell me what to do. I stood in my kitchen with the fridge humming behind me and the voicemail echoing through the room. For years of warnings, all ignored, now spoken back to me in a whisper of desperation. Called her. She answered on the first ring, breathless. I told her, I warned you. Every quarter. You know I did. She said, I know. Just help us. Please. I told her the recovery procedure existed in documentation. She whispered, we never finished implementing it. Of course they didn't. I ended the call. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. They needed to face what they had built. Thursday morning, the stock dropped 31% at market open. Apex's lobby televisions had the news on repeat. Diana found me watching one of the segments. She asked, are you okay? I told her, it's strange. I'm not happy they're suffering. I'm just tired of being the only one who saw it coming. She nodded. Failure isn't always tragedy. Sometimes it's the price of refusing to listen. That afternoon, she pulled me aside and said, their interim CTO reached out to us. The board removed half their executives this morning. They're offering a massive consulting fee. One-day engagement. Remote only. I stared at the offer details. It was ridiculous money. Enough to pay down Emma's tuition for a year. Enough to fix things for innocent employees caught in the blast radius. I told Diana I needed time. She said, it's your call. You owe them nothing. Later, Chris from my team walked up to me with a mug of coffee. He said, you know, letting someone drown sends a message. But helping them after they tried to drown you? That sends a much louder one. I asked him, what message? He said, that you were never the problem, and that losing you was their failure, not yours. That night, I called the chairman of TechVault's board. He answered with, Mr. Hoffman, thank you. We are prepared to offer. I stopped him. I told him my consulting rate, $2,500 per day, paid up front. He agreed instantly. Then I said, I have conditions. Silence. He said, name them. I told him, remote only. I give instructions your team implements. Official written acknowledgement that I warned the company repeatedly. 6 months severance for every laid-off team member in my department. And funding for the infrastructure team I proposed 2 years ago. Papers rustled. Someone whispered in the background. He said, we agree. How soon can you begin? By that evening, payment cleared. I logged into a remote session and guided their remaining engineers through the recovery I had documented months earlier, step by painful step. 8 hours. No shortcuts. No sympathy. Just the truth. Their system stabilized just before midnight. Barely. The next morning, Apex was buzzing. We finalized the architecture plan. The energy in that meeting felt like sunlight after months of storms. 3 months later, I stood on stage at the same Denver conference where I'd met Diana. Only this time I wasn't alone. I was leading Apex's new infrastructure resilience division, built directly from the lessons of TechVault's collapse. I spoke about organizational blind spots, about single points of failure, about the cost of undervaluing the invisible people who keep the lights on. The auditorium was full. Cameras flashing, people scribbling notes. In the third row, I spotted Jennifer and their new CIO. They watched every slide like it was a confession. They knew exactly what they had lost. After the talk, a crowd formed. Questions, handshakes, business cards. And then the new CIO approached. She told me, your documentation saved us, even after they ignored you. I told her, documentation only works when people read it. She nodded slowly and said, they follow everything you do now, every client win, every announcement. I packed up my laptop and walked off stage feeling lighter than I had in years. That night, Emma called after finishing her finals. She said, Dad, you sound different. Happier. She was right. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding together something broken. I was building something new, and I finally understood something. Sometimes the best revenge isn't watching someone fail. The succeeding so completely that they can't ignore what they threw away. Sometimes the sweetest justice is becoming the person they always needed after they no longer have the privilege of having you.